Thank you so much. So I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Obstetrics, Gynecology, and Reproductive Sciences at UCSF. So today I'll be presenting our research looking at support and perceived contraceptive use among alters and their effects on contraceptive behaviors among women in rural Uganda. And our team has decided to call this the Akakwate study, which is support coming from your friends and family. So I like to start with this image. This is my friend Bori. Coming out of college, I was a Peace Corps volunteer for 2 years in Madagascar. And I spent a lot of my time there just sitting with women, getting to know them, talking to them, learning about their lives. And then eventually I became really close with Bori. And just hearing about her aspirations for her family. And eventually when we became close enough, she started asking me questions about contraception, because she knew I was a health volunteer, so I shared what I knew. But then I really said, you should really go see the Rasazi, the local nurse. She'll tell you everything about the different methods, the potential side effects. And then a while later, we started talking about contraception again. And Bori had said, well, no, I didn't go to the Rasazi. Actually, I went to my sister's. And it was clear that she really wanted to hear from her sisters and their experience using contraception. And one of them had been using the injectable and had had some bad side effects, and that really stuck in her mind. And so just this conversation in particular just really struck me how important people's social networks are. And they have access to the nurse or the doctor, but they really want to go to their sister, their female friend, or their mothers and ask them about their experience. And so that was way back when I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and this has really informed my research through today. I also like starting with this slide. I know we usually end with them, but I think sometimes we give them short shrift. And it's also to point out that there's a number of collaborators that are because of this training program. So Sarah Pyombo, 2 years ago, I was talking with Tom. He said he had an amazing graduate student interested in similar research. And then ever since then, she and I have been doing a lot of projects together, and it's been this amazing collaboration. And then there's Jim Moody. I knew him first by reputation. And then I had to resubmit my K and improve the social network analyses, so I asked him if he'd be my mentor. And now many years later, we just submitted like my first R1 together to build on this research. And then Carol Camlin, who's been my mentor at UCSF for several years now. I'm also really grateful for the Uganda team that I've been working with over the past several years. And this research is funded through a K01 from NICHD and the UCSF Population Health and Health Equity Fellows Program. Okay, so in terms of background, almost half of married reproductive age women in Uganda want to avoid pregnancy, and then another third are undecided if they want to become pregnant or not. Yet only 37% are currently using modern contraception. And right now, about the current fertility rate is around 5 children per woman in Uganda. We know that universal access to contraceptive services is a key priority for the Sustainable Development Goals. Ensuring women have access to desired contraceptive services supports their reproductive autonomy, and will also help contribute to reducing the persistently high rate of maternal mortality. We know there's several factors at different levels that affect contraceptive use. So at the individual level, for example, there's still lack of correct knowledge about different methods, including a lot of misperceptions. Then we have these interpersonal barriers, including women's lack of autonomy, couples' discordance about fertility preferences, and then social norms about contraceptive use. And then we have structural barriers, including lack of access to confidential, high-quality services, transportation barrier, and availability and affordability of these services. So I've been always really interested in the role that social networks can play, and we know they can affect contraceptive outcomes through different mechanisms. So it could be social influence, peer modeling. I learned from my friend, her experience using a different method, and that might make me more likely to adopt that method. Social norms, how supportive is your social network for related to contraceptive use? Is no one using in your network? Are most people using? And then overall social support, informational support, emotional support, instrumental support. So there is actually a lot of research looking at social networks and their relationship with contraceptive outcomes. And a lot of the studies find this positive association. If your alters are using, the ego is more likely to use. However, there's a lot of limitations to most of the studies looking at this. They're mostly cross-sectional. They don't account for potential homophily. And they're also not exploring the mechanisms. Is it through peer effects, through social norms, or another mechanism? The most rigorous evidence, interestingly, I think is quite dated. So there's a study from Berman et al. In Kenya using longitudinal data, and then Valente and Saba in Bolivia in 2001. So they're the more rigorous findings, but they're dated and it's 2-country contexts. So this is not research that I'm presenting today, but that we just completed and it's under review, where we wanted to identify how is social influence happening for contraceptive use. And we applied a stochastic actor-oriented model, which we heard about from David Schaefer yesterday, using a 2-mode network where women can select into what method they're using or not using a method, and adjusting for factors affecting social tie formation. And we did find a strong social influence effect. So partnered women were about 1.3 times more likely to use a method that their alter was already using in the prior period. And this was 3 waves of sociocentric data in rural Uganda. We also found that partnered women were about 1.3 times more likely to use methods that were already popular in their network, as opposed to the less popular methods. So I was very excited about this research. A stochastic actor-oriented model hasn't been applied to this topic yet, and we're showing a strong social influence effect. So now we wanted to build on this work and look at what is the mechanism. Is it more through, what is it? How are alters affecting ego's contraceptive outcomes? And so our study is really inspired by Tom's study, which is dated in 1997 from Cameroon, which I've always found super interesting, where he looks at different aspects of alters' behavior. And they find that alter who encourage contraceptive use, that's an important predictor for ego's contraceptive use. And then because they have data from the alters, are they actually using, they can look at perceptions of alters' use and the alters' actual use and compare that. And it looks like perceptions matter, even if those perceptions are not right. So I've always found the study super interesting, and there's never, to my knowledge, it hasn't been replicated. So our study is inspired by this. More recently, the field in reproductive health is adjusting how we look at these outcomes. So we don't want to just look at contraceptive use. We want to see, is their use preference aligned? So for women who are using contraception, it's preference aligned if they're using their preferred method. So I want to use the pill, and I'm using the pill. So that's preference aligned. Non-preference aligned is a woman who's using a method, but either wants to switch, and she might face barriers to switching, or she doesn't want to be using anymore, but might face barriers to like removing an IUD, for example. And then you have women not using methods, but they may not be using a method and they don't want to. Maybe they don't want to use contraception, or they're trying to become pregnant. And then you have women who are not using but want to use, so that's not preference aligned. So this is where we're trying to improve on the past studies and use these measures of overall contraceptive use. Among users, is it using your preferred method? And then among non-users, wanting to start using versus not wanting to start. Okay, so our question is, we're looking at, do social networks contribute to contraceptive outcomes through alters' use of contraceptive methods, the ego's perceptions of alters' use, and or alter supportiveness for contraception? And then we're using these preference-aligned fertility management outcomes. It's a mouthful, but they're coming up with the name. We're in the process. Okay, so for our methods, this is a sociocentric study, so where we interviewed all women of reproductive age across Nyakabare Parish, which is comprised of 8 villages in southwest Uganda. So it's all reproductive age women. And when we interviewed the egos, we asked them to report on are you currently using contraception? Do you want to be using contraception? And if you are you using your desired method? And then we have a name generator to get up to information on up to 6 alters in their health network. So this could be men and women that they nominate. And then among the female alters, we ask the ego, do you think she's using contraception? And would she be supportive of you using contraception? And by virtue of being a sociocentric network study, we have the alter's actual use. So we can do this comparison between perceptions of the alter's use and actual alter use. Something I didn't put on the slide, but that's unique, I think, about our study, is when we're doing the name generator, we have, when they nominate someone, we have a lookup function where they can actually match the person with a photo. We've been doing these data collection for many years now, so we have everyone in the system. So when you say, I rely on Hadija, and they pick up all the people called Hadija in the parish, so we can match the correct Hadija, because otherwise name matching can be a disaster, especially in these settings where you might go by different names. So that's one of the beauties, is this is the exact person that they're nominating. Okay, so our primary outcomes are current contraceptive use. Among those using, are they using their preferred method versus wanting to switch or stop? And then among those not using, do they want to start using as opposed to not wanting to use? So our predictors of interest are out degree, numbers of alters actually using contraception, number of alters perceived by the ego to be using contraception, and the number of alters supportive of contraceptive use. And then we have covariate adjustment for a lot of ego level characteristics, including how many children she already has, intention to have more children, couples desired fertility if there's discordance, and then contraceptive decision making if they are partnered, so who makes that decision. We use a generalized linear model to estimate adjusted odds ratios. Okay, so these are the characteristics of our sample. So on average, they're 33 years old. They've had almost 4 children so far. You can see almost half want to have more children. Half have completed primary education. And then 12% self-report living with HIV. So this is high. It's a high prevalence setting in terms of HIV. And then in terms of contraceptive use, 62% are currently using. Among the users, most of them are using the method they want to be using. However, what's interesting is among the non-users, 85% want to start using. And then in terms of their network characteristics, they nominate on average two other people. And this is the female alters that we restricted it to. So 2 other women in their network. About 43% of alters are actually using contraception in their network. Perceived to be using is a little higher, 55%. And then you can see there's high perceived alter support for contraceptive use. And then this is the interesting part. How correct are these perceptions? So almost 3/4 are correct. What they think their alter is doing is what the alter is reporting to be doing in terms of contraceptive use. 17% are overestimating, think their alter is using when she's not actually using. And then 7% don't think their alter is using when she's actually using contraception. And then we have 66% of alters where we have no self-report. And this is because, this is one of the interesting findings from the study, is that a lot of them are nominating older women, so out of the reproductive age category, as influential in their health network. So those women could be supportive of contraceptive use, but they're not actually contraceptive users because they're older. So that's why they don't go into here, but they are important in the network. So here is our sociogram. And maybe it lives up to Jim's measure of beauty for sociograms. I think it's quite beautiful. So to walk you through it, so these are all women of reproductive age across the 8 villages. So in green are women who are not using a method, don't want to start using. Blue, they're not using, but they want to start using a method. So like that node is interesting. And then orange, she's using, but she wants to switch or stop. And then the pink are using, and they're happy with what they're using. And then they're sized by in degree. So a lot of people seem to be going to this person for health advice. You can see who these nodes are that a lot more women are going to for health advice. What's interesting is it looks like there's a lot of isolates, that they don't have a health network. But when we add these older women, who are not egos in our study, but they're reported on as alters, as important, a lot of women are turning to these older women for health information. And you can see, for example, she's really important here, this elder woman. And I think in terms of next steps, it's important to consider who are these older women? Why are they so important in terms of women's health? Why are they being sought out for advice? And they could be important disseminators of correct information. Okay, so this is our first model. So we're adjusting for all these ego level characteristics, and at the top are our network characteristics. So you see out degree is negatively associated with contraceptive use. And it's something that Tom brought. So high out degree, people are seeking out information from a lot of people. They could get a lot of diverse information, but they don't seem to be as likely to adopt as people having smaller networks, maybe more on the periphery, who might be more free to use contraception than someone that might be more constrained by their network. So out degree is negatively associated with contraceptive use. And then we find that for each additional supportive alter, they're almost have three times higher odds of using contraception. So alter supportiveness is super important. This finding that she makes her decision alone as opposed to with a partner, or he makes the decision, is confusing to us because it's not clear why she's less likely to use if she makes that decision alone and maybe doesn't have to negotiate with her partner. So we're trying to figure that finding out. Okay, so this is that first model. We do the same model, but now looking at perceived use among alters. That's also positively predictive of contraceptive use. So you have more alters that you think are using contraception, you're more likely to use it. And then we have actual use among alters. This is only significant at the 10% level, so it's suggestive that actual use also matters, but it's just at the 10% level. So here we're combining everything in the same model. And what really stands out is it seems to be really having supportive alters is what's most important in terms of predicting current use of contraception. So this is a predicted probability from those results. You see each additional alter who's supportive of contraceptive use much more likely to be using contraception. And then here we graphed it. Conditional, or having 0 alters using, 1 alter, 2 alters. There's like small bumps up. We can't distinguish them from each other, but again, you see this like clear trajectory from having supportive alters on your contraceptive use. And so now we're looking at, among women who are using contraception, are there social network predictors of using your preferred method? And we don't find effects here. So all these different characteristics coming from the alters, we don't find effects here. But what's interesting is these are among the non-users. And you remember a lot want to start using. So it suggests that it's at the 10% level, but I still think it's interesting. It's alters, having alters in your network who are actually using contraception is suggestive of wanting to start using. So having those examples of you, I'm not using, but if I have alters who are using, there's suggestive evidence that that's influencing me to want to start. And then here, among non-users, if she makes her decision on her own, much more likely to want to start using. Okay, so in conclusion, so it seems to be what matters most is having supportive alters as opposed to alters who are using or perceived to be using. Actual use, women who are not using, it seems for them it might be drawing on their alters experience of actually using methods. That seems to be important. And then that interesting finding of the more central individuals are less likely to be using compared to ones with smaller networks, maybe more on the periphery that might have more freedom to adopt a behavior or not. And then this really interesting finding about older alters being important sources of information and support for contraceptive use. So we want to look into that more because I think that's a really interesting and not a finding I was expecting. So in terms of like my next steps thinking about this research, we want to figure out who these central nodes are, who these influencers are that everyone's going to for advice. I'm really interested in the idea of seeding information, seeing how it spreads. So who are those central nodes? The importance of these elders. I want to go back to our stochastic actor-oriented model. That the data we had was just among partnered women, which is a huge limitation because we're not looking at unpartnered women, and it's important to look at them also. So in future research, we want to replicate it, but among all reproductive age women. And then, yeah, understanding who is best placed to seed correct information, because there's still a lot of misperceptions. And that's a big driver of why women are reluctant to use a method, even though they want to be using a method. Voila. Mm-hmm.
I was curious, like, what the time dynamics are like of contraception. Like, is it typically that women like have children and then want contraception, or they mix it go on and off, like between children? Like, you know, to what extent is that 85% like reflection of what you said? Maybe I want you to get back on, or just is it? Do you have any idea like how that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Our data don't, like, this is more anecdotally. I think women cycle on and off. They want to, maybe they get married but delay it a bit, have a child, they want to have more birth spacing. There's definitely a preference for having like 5 children. Men want to have slightly more than the woman. But I think they want to go on the method just to delay it a bit, and so I don't have so many young children, is what they say. Yeah. Yes, so I think that's one of the beauties of the study, because there's a lot of mismatch if you're trying to match on names, and in these contexts the names are super long and it's hard to match. There's a whole consent process, so like when you consent into the study, you consent to be part of the study, you consent to have your photo taken, knowing that the other villagers will see it. I think that's why, like, it's all villagers, so it's not like, I have another study that's just looking at women living with HIV. Like, you don't want to just show a subset of the population with a certain condition. So it's definitely, it's the whole, everyone's on there, and so there's a lookup function. They consent to be on there. So I think we've gotten through, like, we've thought about the ethics of it, and it's just all villagers. It's not self-selecting because you have a certain behavior or not. But I do think it's really unique, and it's been really helpful. And this is like the parent study is longitudinal, and we're 10 years into it. So like the study participants are used to this. Like there's a lot of like community buy-in, and yeah.
Thank you so much.